Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today's video is going to be all about the new update, which has just launched about an hour ago. This is 1.5.0. We're going to jump into the features in the client that were changed, the profile customization and so forth, and then back into the live stream year one update balance discussion. At the very end of the video, I have also included a read through of the patch notes, some of my thoughts there as well. So this is a long video, guys. I've included timestamps in the description below, and I really do hope you enjoy it. Let's jump in. All right, guys, so we're in the game client here, and we've had this icon in our profile since launch. Let's go ahead and figure out how we're going to change this here. I believe you go to loadout. You have, of course, all the different factions, skins. You're going to go all the way down here to profile, and we have these Black Devils legendary skin that was unlocked for the premium edition, or icon rather. Now you're going to be able to change it to the default badge, which is really cool. Or the Bercieri, Grenadier, Half Screw, or Rifleman. So you're going to have all these different options here. I assume everyone's going to have this option. I don't think it's based on the Premium Edition. So go ahead and go to Loadout, go to Profile. You can add any of these here. Which one am I going to add? Actually, it's kind of like too standard, right? Let's go for double rifles here. But yeah, so pretty cool. I like these. Obviously, I would like to see this filled out over time through challenges and other modes, but very cool overall. It's a good start. Now, you have badges here. If you go down to titles, you have all these different titles which you can add. So, general errands, and they said they have some more coming that are pretty creative and fun, pretty clever. These are pretty standard, pretty basic so far. Let's go with the general's errands. Okay, and then banners. So we have 4 banners. Looks like I'll probably be going for... These are all references to artwork, trailers, content we've seen already. But I do like this AirCav U.S. Forces profile banner. Pretty cool. When I want to look at that... Once again, this is being blocked, unfortunately, by my camera, but you guys can see the banner up top. So I like the fact that you can also kind of combine complementary badges and titles. And if you want to see the new features in the actual quick match lobby, we have right here, of course, the badge, the banner in the background, which looks pretty damn cool. You have the different options of your battle groups overlaying over it. Look how much better this stands out. Look at that. Right? I mean, over time, guys, these are going to look pretty damn cool. And who knows what they're going to be adding in the future.
So this general patch is kind of aimed towards doing a few things. The primary one is we have a minor overhaul of some of our battle groups from launch. And then we have some major changes to the Brits, specifically to some of their more underused units. And then we have some general changes to the rest of the factions.
So a bit of a
switch
British
over to my very fancy PowerPoint
faction
presentation.
redesign.
So you just covered sort of those 3 main key areas that we're going to talk about today. Darren, before we kind of get into specifics, did you have anything else to say about these areas of focus? You know, were there any sort of like big impactful changes that are coming to multiplayer that you want players to know about?
For the Brit ballot, in particular, as Jason said, we're primarily targeting their more underused units, so hopefully this should tune up some of the British, but in a way that diversifies their strategies rather than keeping them to a particular play style. So we're hoping our changes will give the British like more build order options.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
British is very linear, so that's nice to hear.
The faction by faction specific details. Were there any sort of general changes coming to the game that you wanted to touch on?
Overall, I think this time around we strayed away from doing anything too systemic.
Okay.
We're mostly kind of still letting the dust settle with the major changes that went in with 1.4 and kind of seeing how those kind of work out in the long run. One of the interesting things that has happened on this current patch is that we've seen quite a few things change over the course of the patch. And even even in the last month or so, we've seen notable mutations in how people play.
Okay.
So yeah, this patch is going to be a little bit less on the big systemic changes, but there's still some major ones to shake up things.
I am kind of curious, like what have been some of your observations about how people have been playing since Steel Shepherd and how that's sort of evolved?
Well, one of the funniest things to me is like how Dak has just grown stronger and stronger as people really figured out some of the things we added to them.
Yeah.
How to really exploit them. And also we've seen more recently in the last few weeks, some adaptations from Allies players of like how to deal with this. So yeah, for me, it's really cool to see people push and pull with the meta.
Yeah. What about you, Darren? Any sort of things that you've noticed over the last month or so with Steel Shepherd?
At least for the new battle groups, I think people have been finding ways to counter them or different ways to play against them. So these two battle groups in particular, or particularly in Coastal, you don't play the same way that you would fight Coastal compared to how you would fight the rest of the standard Wehrmacht loadout.
Right. Okay, so I think we should probably just get into some of the faction changes here. So do we want to start with maybe more general changes that are coming to the U.S. forces?
Yeah, good old USF. You want to start, Darren?
Yeah, so for USF, we're not really giving them like a big changes as a whole, but we're trying to do some things to bring back the air support center in some way. So particularly,
Totally
we are
useless.
allowing like the first recon run level to just always provide vision to the player. So you no longer need to upgrade it. To get vision, the Americans can always just go to the air support center and always have a constant vision tool that will be able to spot for their artillery off maps and other available units and abilities. And we're also slightly buffing back the P-47 strafing run now that we have a proper anti-air that can counter the ability.
Yeah, so a little bit more depth from the air, but also now that we actually have some meaningful counterplay, we're bringing it back ever so slightly. It's not as strong as it was back in its peak, so hopefully we don't trigger anyone's PTSD there. But, hopefully, we'll keep an eye on this because like the new AA has it's still settling in terms of how people are kind of engaging with it. So again, this is something we'll be tracking. But just for reference, for the recon run, we've actually flipped the way it worked between the upgraded and non-upgraded versions. So now you get the low flying plane by default, and then you get a high flying plane that is actually harder to shoot down as the upgraded version. We found the old version of it not really intuitive, and in a lot of scenarios, kind of you upgrade it to make it almost worse in a way. So
okay, that's great to know. What other stuff is maybe coming to some of the core roster units?
Yeah. Outside of that, we don't really have any huge changes to the units. I believe we have some minor tune-ups up and down for the Chaffee, the 4x4, and the Sherman. The 4x4, the Chaffee in particular, we're increasing its target size ever so slightly because we've noted that in some matchups they are overperforming. Though we do think a big portion of why the light vehicle spam is so good for Americans comes down to the U.S. armored, which we'll cover in the battle group changes, and we do have some more major changes in that regard to kind of really, because we've noticed that in recent days that the meta really revolves around armored in particular. So we do have some changes targeting that.
Okay, cool. Do we want to just get into battle groups right now, Darren?
Yeah, let's go into it.
Okay.
Yeah. You want to go?
Do we want to go on to special operations?
Yeah, let's start with Spec Ops. So
special operations, this is mainly a change that we wanted to do. We wanted to differentiate the special operations strafe from the air support center. So if anyone remembers the assault support strafe from Company of Heroes 2, this is very much how the special operation and strafing run will now act. You'll have two planes that loiter the area to shoot at infantry. It's not a high damage anti-infantry strafe, but it is enough to pin and suppress units and essentially deny the area to enemy troop movements, and it should now also be worth its cost. Where before, if you had like double ASC upgrades, you pretty much had the same effect on the P-47 strafing run.
Right, so now a loiter versus a standard sort of call-in. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. That's more tactical, I suppose.
And what about armored battle group? I think I have a side-by-side here with some of the big changes.
Yeah, if you could jump to that. Yeah, awesome. So we've done a few changes. One of which we'll kind of I think we'll get into the really meat of that a little bit later.
Yeah.
I'm sure players can kind of see something in that corner there. But for now, the major changes that are coming to it are that fast deploy is now no longer 0 CP. So the double Jeeps will stop terrorizing Wehrmacht in particular. We've changed some of the CPs around to make some of the things a little bit more attractive. And anything else? Am I missing?
We did some speed bonus nerfs across the board for Seek and Destroy and Storm.
And then since it's already there, I will mention that we have added an alternative to the E8, or at least the E8 colon that allows you to produce E8s from the text structure directly. So this won't replace the old change, but this will be an added alternative, but with no CP cost. Because we'll get into a more detailed discussion of this a little bit later. But the primary idea was we didn't like the fact that we have to punish players who weren't text skipping. We could only balance it around the power of the ability around text skippers, because that was the best way to use it, right? But then we were kind of punishing everyone else who wanted to use the E8 as a cool unit, right?
Right.
So we wanted to create an alternative where we could balance the two play styles separately. So we could still balance around the call-in playstyle, but not punish people who just want to build an E8 through the text structure.
Okay. Like you said, maybe let's circle back to this discussion about that change specifically at the end, because I know we have a lot more to cover, and we can probably talk about this specific change probably for like half an hour. Okay, so Darren, was there anything else about the armored battle group that you want to cover, or should we just move to the Wehrmacht?
No, there's nothing really else about armor we really need to cover. I think you've already covered the fast deploy change, which should reduce the strength of like early 4x4 and particularly 1v1 game modes.
Yeah, and the speed decrease to search and destroy should hopefully tone back quite how devastating Hellcat or Chaffee rushes can be with this battle group, which we've noted to be particularly problematic.
Yep.
So yeah, we're kind of toning all these back. We'll still be keeping a close eye on it. But yeah.
I hate that spam.
All right, so let's jump into the Wehrmacht then.
Mid-game vehicle spam is so gross.
Here?
So for Wehrmacht, really, for dispatch, we're not really changing them up too much for the most part. Most of their meaningful changes are coming in the battle group. We've only done really just minor tune-ups and tone downs for like the Whirlwind's going to cost a little bit more fuel to reflect its price, and like the artillery officer for the coastal will now take a little bit more time for the first barrage to hit you, giving you more time to dodge. Though I think the biggest one for Wehrmacht is we're blocking locking the communication cable behind an increased munition cost, so you can't get it early game
for the Kettenkrad.
Yeah, for the Kettenkrad, because we're noticing like people would just pump out the Kettenkrad, and it would give Wehrmacht a lot of map control very early in the game for 25 munition investment for how early it hits the field and for how fast it is in the game. But we still want to keep it as a speedy scout unit.
Right.
Yeah.
So
and
the
in
Jeep comes out
compensation,
later,
because we noted that the Kettenkrad was kind of the capturing crutch for the faction, we've made Grenadiers go from 1 capture rate to 1.25, which still isn't quite as fast as a regular mainline unit, but it is it's significantly better than it was before.
Yeah.
So hopefully, like overall, we want to make it so that Wehrmacht isn't as tied to their Kettenkrad. We've noted that at high level play, a lot of their success comes down to how well they use their Kettenkrad, which is great, but we don't want to make it so that you must go Kettenkrad to stay viable and early.
Yeah.
So that's kind of that change.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Do we want to get into some of the battle group changes? I know you mentioned the artillery officer. Were there any other specific changes you wanted to get into before we talk about the mechanized battle group?
No, I think most of the other ones are minor. Yeah.
Okay. So let's jump to this before and after for mechanized, because again, there are some pretty interesting changes here.
Yeah.
So,
sorry, go ahead. No, you go ahead.
For mechanized, they're getting their abilities replaced. So we're giving mechanized the ability to have their light vehicles to repair other vehicles that are nearby. So it incentivizes either going half tracks or scout cars to act as a repair unit, or keep them in the late game to act as those mobile repair stations for your heavier vehicles.
Okay.
In addition, we're also swapping one part of the tree. So like the mechanized assault and the zeroing artillery are being swapped with the row where the Westby and the
Oh, wow.
STG-44 are.
That's awesome.
So that will allow the Westby to arrive earlier for the Wehrmacht, giving them like a nice battle
Dude.
group to get early in direct fire units,
Okay.
as well as pushing back some of their more powerful abilities in the mechanized.
Very
battle
interesting.
Mhm.
I think that's going to be strong.
And it looks like, looking at that new icon, it looks like the Stug comes with some Stossstruppen. Is that right?
Yes. The Stug colon has now been changed, so it's no longer Panzer Grenadiers. It's now Stossstruppen.
Okay.
So, which should make this a lot more exciting for players. We've actually also
At
kept the
4
cost
command
fairly
points.
low, so you get a meaningful discount using this because it does arrive at a very interesting time for the Wehrmacht. So we want to incentivize players that kind of build around this colon to kind of shape the way their mid-game plays and hopefully give Mechanized a distinct alternative style to the 8-Rad, which has been pretty much dominant for how do you play this
So
battle.
just to note, it is already in game, but now players will be able to tell that this thing now comes with
Yeah.
Stossstruppen.
Okay, cool.
Badass.
And I think there's also the in the bottom left there's that same change for the Panther.
Yes.
So do you want to touch on that now, or just
Yeah.
save that for a bit?
Just mechanically, it's the same thing as the E8. It allows you to build it straight from your tier 4, but we'll leave the detailed discussion for later.
Okay. Any final things?
I'm really
about
curious about
Wehrmacht
the
before
cost of
we,
these.
Move on.
We have some minor nerfs to coastal, but I think you actually mentioned them.
Yeah, they're only minor nerfs to coastal.
Mhm.
Like, will
Well,
Easy
we're
8s and
hoping
Panthers
more
cost
that-
more from the tech
That was
structure?
the buffs to some British units that it will, at least for the British faction, it'll allow them to tackle coastal a lot better.
Mhm.
Okay.
Speaking of which,
Yeah, speaking of the British, I know you mentioned that this was sort of a more of a key focus for this update. So lay it on me. What are we doing to buff my British boys?
So I'll first start, but at a high level, we've basically adjusted. Oh boy, a good half of the roster.
Wow.
It's not like we overhauled every unit, but we've given all the units a bit of a touch up or down, kind of to adjust how you especially how you tackle the early game with this faction. We've noted that like the viable ways of playing this faction have kind of been shaved down over time because certain units weren't performing as well, or certain other units, like we buffed certain playstyles in other factions.
Right.
So a lot of these changes are to kind of bring back a strong kind of free-flowing Brit early game that allows you to kind of opt into what you want to do rather than being forced into, hey, I have to do this or I will lose to Xstrat kind of gameplay.
Mhm.
Okay.
But for some details, Darren, you want to start?
do we want to go on to the infantry section then for a bunch of our
Sure,
details?
yeah.
British early game is
so we're
very
buffing
limited.
a lot of like the underused upgrades and abilities and units for the British,
Mhm.
particularly for the infantry section. We feel their scope rifles and boys anti-tank rifles are fine, and in the early game they're just good enough to get by. But later into the game, like the Bren gun was not performing as it should.
Right.
Yeah.
And the Bren gun, it has always been designed to be like the premier anti-infantry upgrade for the Tommies that helps them scale.
Mhm.
So now
Yeah.
we are making adjustments to the Bren gun in particular, or so that this is the upgrade you want if you want your Tommies to compete with most other
Mhm.
infantry into the mid to late game. You will buy the Bren gun and for that combat power, or the Recce package is there for the utility, and the boys is there to act as soft anti-tank.
That sounded like a threat. You will buy the brain gun.
Darren's emphasis on this, yeah. Like one of the original problems was, while it was sometimes worth its cost, it often felt like a compromise when you got the Bren gun. Like it was your best option, but it wasn't an attractive option.
Yeah.
Now we've kind of made it so that it's a little bit cheaper and it's a little bit better. So it's something you really want to go for, but the
Yeah.
choice is still there, right? If you go for the Bren gun, you're losing on either AT or utility. And it's also still the most expensive upgrade by far.
I think it should have
this
ability
should
as
kind
well.
of like lifen up the IS, especially in the mid game where we've noticed that they can struggle sometimes against certain units.
Mhm.
So this should kind of bring them to par.
Okay.
Very
What
nice.
else are we doing here?
It's a
Yeah.
good change.
So
Yeah, go ahead.
Royal Engineers, they're getting a minor health boost. This should help them against certain small arms, but not going to help them against all small arms.
Wow.
The big thing is we're increasing their capture rate for this. So this is going to pair well with our next point later on. On as this, the change to Royal Engineers is going to give the British a bit more capping power in the early game, allowing them to take those points more quickly,
Mhm.
especially with the first sapper or going into a second sapper is also can be useful as like your fast capping build for the British now. Now
Nice.
that they do have that increased capture power and the fact they're available from the HQ at the start of the game.
More
Right.
build order options for the
Kind of
Brits.
similar to before. We found that any kind of build that tried to get sappers early would get punished overly too much.
100%.
You do get like a powerful kind of assault unit that a lot of the other factions can't really get early, but the costs were a little too high, so we've basically never saw it after a certain point. So hopefully this is to bring this back so that you have some flexibility with some ideas of getting engineers early.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about the Dingo Scout?
Yeah.
So this is where the engineers pair particularly well.
Oh,
at least
man.
from our playtest.
Yeah.
I didn't even realize if we put all our changes together, it forms almost like a whole paragraph. But,
So for the Dingo, we've done some major improvements to its weapons responsiveness. So
Mhm.
we've toned that up quite a bit. But we've also increased its damage, so it is going to be on par with the other ultralight scout units. Before it was less than those units because it did have that previously much higher armor, though that has been lost over time. So your Dingo will be effective as a combat unit. And we want to keep the Dingo as a combat scout. We don't want it to be like a capture vehicle
Right.
like the other factions have. So the
Okay.
Dingo is particularly geared to be used as a combat vehicle. We did have to do some minor changes to it, like increase its cost very slightly. And we did
Oh,
some
wow.
health and armor adjustment. And so it's just a little bit easier to ward off, but still keep some durability because with the new sappers who are capping behind the Dingo, the Dingo can prove to be very oppressive against certain units because it forces your infantry to remain in cover.
Mhm.
It's very effective against infantry who are out of cover, and it can also be used to either hunt down other ultralight vehicles, forcing them off capture points, or against
Yeah.
the DAC, you can just try to hunt the 250 with it.
Right,
so
It will generally win.
So is the intent here to sort of use your Dingo to screen for engineers that are capping behind you?
So the idea of the Dingo is this idea of being able to trade off some of your early capping for really basically overpowered combat unit. So the trade off is I will give up some of my map control.
Right.
In exchange,
Okay.
it's a gamble to see if I can deny you more.
Right.
And that's kind of the main dynamic of the Dingo is this idea of like, I will try and do as much damage to you early as I can. And then because the Dingo eventually will die. Well, unless you're amazing. But like and also it has some of the lower utility of our ultralight scouts, especially now that we've given the scout commander, which is the intent. Like the Dingo is this early game gamble that players can go for. If you go for one, or if you're really looking for a different game, you can go for two and try and really trade in and get some good damage early. In exchange, you don't get ISs out early, you don't get their veterancy scaling as fast, and also you lose out on capping. That's kind of the main idea. A lot of the changes, though, are not all just boss. A lot of them are just to change so that the responsiveness of the unit is a lot better. We've noted through multiple patches that either it can't shoot units off its arc. Like there was a whole patch where
Yeah.
it struggled to kind of like retarget.
Yeah.
And it should be a lot better than before. It's still a fixed arc light vehicle, so it can be a little bit hard to use, but it should be significantly more mobile.
Nice.
Darren, any other thoughts on the Dingo before we move on?
Yeah, so the Dingo, even if it does fall off a little bit, because it's able to achieve that veterancy and fight as a scout, that combat scout, it will still be very effective in the scouting role because the Dingo is the only scouting unit of the four factions that always has its increased vision, and you don't have to do anything to get it.
Mhm.
So even if once your Dingo has done enough damage and you don't want to pull it back, like to be withdrawn,
It still has some.
you can still keep it around for the ability to either harass like lone capture squads or provide like constant vision to like the slower British army and their team weapons.
It also gives Brits kind of a high micro unit early on because infantry sections and sappers can be a little slow at times. So we wanted to give players also an option that's kind of like a little bit a lot more high risk, high reward. than their regular options. Which kind of brings us to our next unit, which serves a very similar role, but a little bit higher up, which is the Humber.
Nice.
You want to start with the changes?
I love this unit, man.
So we did a bunch of changes to the Humber. We wanted to still keep it as a fast-moving anti-infantry scout vehicle, but we didn't want it to be like resistant to anti-tank fire. So we've done some changes to make it more readily available. So losing your first Humber is not going to be like game ending for the British player.
Okay. Yeah.
But we're also doing things like increasing its speed, giving it increased vision, so it can either run away from those spotted threats that's much earlier or run down other unit. It's chasing after. And we've also done some
super cool.
The big thing we've done for the Dingo is increase its armor in particular. So this is going to help it a lot against like the autocannon in vehicles. In particular, this allows the Humber to actually duel the flak half track that the DAC has. So if the DAC goes a flak half track but overextends, the Humber is capable of both running down the flak half track or beating it out up in a head-on duel if the flak has like nothing to spot for it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
It's gonna be this kind of lightweight, high micro punch unit.
Okay.
That we've noted that can get a lot of value in the hands of like really good players. So we're gonna be keeping a close eye on this one in particular. But we've noted that like this unit has struggled to kind of catch on because it is a lot of micro required to get proper value out of the unit. But we also know that with the proper micro, this unit can be really good. So we're keeping an eye on it.
Sounds like it might be overpowered.
But yeah, like Darren said, we made it so that it's a lot better against, well, it's not meant to counter, for example, a lot of the Axis light vehicles that arrive. So the 8-rad and the flak half track, for example, will still be pretty good against the Humber. But the Humber now has some teeth to it in this relationship, particularly the flak half track. If you're not ready, like if you're not stationary and if you're not sighted, for example, the Humber can beat the flak half track in certain scenarios. So beware.
And I'll just add another point. We've also increased the Humber's reliability. There was a weird thing going on with our Humber where it was only good against large squads, but now
the incremental.
We removed its incremental accuracy, so this will make the Humber consistent against most infantry squads, regardless of their size.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I think next up here we have the Stuart light tank.
That was more of a minor change. So the Stuart had 3 effects to its tread shot. We're changing it to 1, so it's like straightforward to use on how you want to use tread shot rather than all right, am I at range 25? Am I at range 10? Am I at range 35?
Yeah.
Because it's very hard to gauge. And with how fast vehicles can move to get out of range of the Stuart, or who will be trying to back up if you're trying to use tread shot, it was more ideal just to keep it to 1 effect that is good against all targets at regardless of where you hit them. But only you get that 1 effect.
Okay.
Got it.
Is there anything else in the core roster that you wanted to touch on before we get to battle groups?
Yeah. So we got to get to the big one.
The Grant.
We got to get to the Grant.
Yeah, it's down there. So we've noted that this vehicle has been a little bit overshadowed by its compatriots in the Matilda and the Crusader. While those tanks have very clear identities and also very good in those identities, the Grant has struggled a little bit throughout the game to kind of find its role. And these changes are meant to kind of cement it as the firepower tank of the Brits.
Okay.
So we've given it some extra health, and we've increased basically its firepower by increasing the pen on the main gun and also increasing the teeth on the secondary gun. The secondary gun still is a light 37 mil, so it's not going to be destroying your Tiger or anything like that. But with the added stats to it, it's more something more equivalent to like a Stuart weapon, which doesn't sound amazing until you realize these are one vehicle with 2 weapons,
right?
And they can very, very quickly add up to both anti-vehicle and anti-infantry rolls, especially if you roll the RNG. Sometimes you can get some significant alpha damage on either infantry or vehicles.
If you're penetrating,
and the idea is to really cement the Grant as this vehicle that, while not as mobile as the Crusader or not nearly as tanky as the Matilda, it is a standalone unit that has the firepower to really kick off late game Axis units.
Right. When you say alpha damage, you mean like that first strike against
Yes.
the enemy?
Yeah. Beware, because you're getting hit by 2 tank guns the moment you encounter the Grant, especially if you're pushing into it, for example, which can really catch you off guard in times. It has in our playtesting, for example.
Yeah. Looking at these changes, it definitely makes it a lot more enticing. I always feel like, oh, do I want to tech into the Grant, or should I just use the tanks I already have? Yeah.
So for the Grant, I will speak on this as well. We wanted to make the Grant feel less like I am a medium with that second gun. Now you are more in class with the advanced medium. So you can think of tanks like the Easy 8 or fully upgraded Panzer IVs. Or so this puts the Grant on par with like those endgame tanks. So,
Gotcha.
Because this is at the very end of the British tech tree. So we wanted to feel rewarding. So if you unlock the Grant, like very few units are going to be able to challenge the Grant head on in a duel, except for like maybe the heaviest Axis tanks. But even then, the Grant, at least when supported, can provide enough fire support to lay down some significant damage if you're not paying attention to it.
But it still can't do what the other tanks can do. So it's not nearly as fast as Crusader. So if you want hit and run, you still need to use the Crusader. And it's not as nearly as good as an enabler as the Matilda is. So it doesn't have something like smoke. It doesn't have the durability the Matilda has. So it should still very much play differently. In fact, like Darren said, when you go the Grant, you kind of want to play around them. Rather than usually when you go the Matilda, you play around, the Matilda, or in some ways the Matilda plays around the rest of your army, in that sense. But so hopefully we're adding finally the third piece into the trifecta of tanks that the Brits can use, to spice up their late game here.
Yeah. Any other final things with the British changes that we want to touch on?
Anything?
Mainly just minor changes. We just toned up a little bit of like the training center for at least the light vehicle and team weapons. So they're going to have fewer bonuses, but the bonuses are going to be much larger for what you get. And so they're worth their price. In particular, team weapons are going to get that extra health and a significant rate of fire bonus. And light vehicles get a major like bonus to how much experience they all get at the start, in addition to having significant mobility and accuracy increases.
Okay, cool. So I feel like, just personally looking at all these changes, I feel like the Brits are back. It definitely feels like a significant overhaul and buff to the core roster already.
The early to mid game buff is big. It's very important for the Brits.
Do you want me to show off the before and after here of the heavy armor?
Yeah.
All right, let's jump to that.
All right, what did they change here?
Some minor changes here. Darren, do you want to touch on what we've done here?
You want to touch on this?
Sure.
More your focus?
So we swapped around a few abilities to kind of make some of the choices a little bit more competitive. So we noted that, for example, the sapper or the veterancy pick basically had no competition. It was something like 92 to 8% pick rate or something like that. So we kind of wanted to make that choice a little bit more compelling. So we swapped those around, and we also wanted to make it so that it was a lot easier to get into that light vehicle recall, because we do think that does enable you to do quite a lot of different play styles early on, whether that be extra dingoes or emphasis on Humbers, or even the CWT truck with the AA gun on top of it. All of those become a lot more interesting or a lot more viable once you have access to this ability. So we're like, okay, well, before you had to double invest to really go into it and really slow down your call-in.
Yeah.
But now we've kind of worked backwards from that. It's like, okay, you still need to delay it, but now it is significantly more appetizing to get. So we're hoping to see this kind of change up how you play Armored early on. There's kind of like more ways to play Armored than just relying on that 4 or 5 CP timing. And there's like some more emphasis on like early game stuff.
Really
where
cool.
You can go early sappers and the recall, where you can go like early, a heavy emphasis on engineers and light vehicles, especially now that we've given engineers better capping as well. So an engineer heavy build with vehicles is a lot more viable as well. To see kind of like, if a vehicle focused kind of Brits gameplay, because we haven't really seen that really take off too much. I know USF kind of has the reverse where it has too much of that, but we're trying to introduce a little bit of that to the Brits.
I've tried this style a
Darren,
lot,
any
and it just was not strong. Too hard to
We've
play.
also done some minor tune-ups to also the heavier vehicles that are found in the roster, so that we've reverted quite a few of the changes to the Crusader anti-air, because previously it was just on par with the Whirlwind, but given its increased cost over the Whirlwind, it didn't make sense for it to generally be worse in most cases. And we've also slightly tuned up the bog standard Churchill. So it's going to take a bit less of your population, and it's going to fire a little bit faster, so it will be able to it'll fight off tanks and infantry a bit easier.
Okay. Cool.
Interesting.
Any other final thoughts on the British forces before we jump to
I think
that?
really good changes here.
Yeah,
I like it.
Yeah, just a quick summary overall. Like we've basically toned up most of their underused units. We're hoping to see some shift in the meta in terms of how you use Brits. Now we know we did put quite a few changes in, so we'll be keeping a close eye on in terms of how Brits kind of take off. Especially like there's going to be kind of like layers to this where people are going to figure out how to use them, and then there's going to be a delay when people figure out how to play against them or not. And then from there, we'll have to kind of make adjustments.
Okay.
So yeah.
We do hope it will allow more gameplay styles with the British, though, with more emphasis on those things that we have listed above. So we hope to see them more in the game.
Yeah, the emphasis is like less raw strength and more just the ability to go more of the options. So we'll definitely be tracking that.
Okay, cool. So let's talk about the Africa Corps. What's going on with our friends in the desert here? What kind of changes have we made to the deck?
Yeah.
So for the deck, we're doing some changes to lessen their power in that early start of the game where light vehicles start hitting the field, but also giving like their very late game options more use and more what's the word I'm looking for? Or just more viability for their like extreme late game options, which were generally you would never go into like the Panzer Army Command for a lot of situations. So we're hoping to like tune that up.
Yeah. We're trying to round out because the deck right now relies on some really sharp edges that we're gonna dull a little bit because they're little like a lot too much of their gameplay kind of it revolves around exploiting very specific weaknesses. That players really like. If you don't know exactly what you're doing and your opponent knows a certain weakness and they exploit it, you can very much just lose the game outright. Which isn't kind of what we want. We want there to be a little bit more push and pull. We still want to reward DAC players for being aggressive like they are currently. But again, it's been a little too sharp. So we're kind of dulling those points. But in exchange for compensation, we're kind of increasing the endurance of the faction by giving their late game options and their side options a little bit more power. So going into some details here, before we talk about armored reserves, the first few major changes is we made the last tier cheaper, and we made the Panzerjäger squad quite a lot better in their AT role. So we've noted that in reverse, if DAC ever falls behind, they really struggle against light vehicles. Cough, Chaffee, cough. So like, we're trying to give them a soft option that isn't just their mortar and their AT gun.
Right.
We've noted that the Panzerjäger can kind of get out tempoed by an armored player that's ahead. Like they can get vehicles faster than you can get AT, which isn't really what we want. If you really invest into AT as DAC, we still want you to be able to insulate yourself from that kind of threat. So that's kind of the major change there. And then also the change to the final tier is to make it so that you can transition into the later game much better in all game modes. So that you can use, for example, the P3 to kind of deal with some of those earlier threats. And also give a little better trade-off between early power and late game power of like, I want to just kill you in the first 15 minutes versus I will fight you up until 25 or 30.
It's a good change because there's no reason to go beyond tier 2 as
some of
DAC.
those specific changes that are
So hard to play tier 3.
So in addition to what Jason mentioned, we are lowering the price of the Panzer Army commands for the final tier. We're also making it so armored reserves are going to give a much higher discount on what you get for them because you have to pay so much to unlock those abilities. It makes sense for these to have such a high discount on these units because for a lot of these units, if you're looking at the Wehrmacht, they would come much earlier for the Panzer IV and the Stug Gs. And the Panzer III is already available in the Panzer Army Command. So it makes no sense that you have paid armored reserves for this, but now you're also paying like a much pretty much the same cost of your Panzer or 3 and just a slight discount on the infantry. Now with this, like over the course of a longer game, DAC will have the ability to get like these discounted armor units. They're not going to be premium discounted armor units, but they are going to allow DAC to scale more into the late game when they're using these cheaper medium tank call-ins rather than going straight for the Tiger.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We do want to reward players for using the non-Tiger options in that tier. So these changes should help that. Outside of that, we have some minor tweaks. I think we have a minor nerf to the 254 in particular. We're reducing the shell count on that because we've noticed that can be kind of devastating to certain emplacements, which, was it was overperforming a little. One of the other things is that we've toned down the 250 in its early game.
Mm-hmm.
We've noted that someone called it the flame chariot was a little too devastating early on.
Yeah.
And it was particularly difficult to fight with small arm infantry. Like you have to use quite a lot of weird tactics to fight it. So while we still want to retain that gameplay of like using the 250 early, we don't want it to be like the only thing you do.
Mm-hmm.
So we've nerfed the armor on it by a bit. But we've also and so now it's much more reliant on getting the upgrade if you want to have strong early 250 play, which is still viable because it's fairly cheap. But yeah.
Because one thing we were noting is that mass small arms infantry fire at the front of a 250 was not enough to award it back.
It just bounced off.
So you could have 2 squads trying to chase off the 250 with a flamethrower inside.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't be enough to at least cause significant damage or make the DAC reconsider charging in. So it often relied on that the allied players had to have early anti-tank grenades to deal with the 250.
Yeah. Moving on from that, we have some minor changes to the flak half track. So we've decreased the speed and the excel, so basically the mobility of the unit. So it's a lot less slippery to its counters. So if you do get proper counters against it out, it's going to be significantly, or it'll be much harder for you to dance around them like you did before. And it also does mean that even if you don't have the counters out, the flak half track can't quite devastate the map as much as it could before. So these changes are kind of to tone back the performance of the unit while not nerfing its overall, like its immediate power too much if you do employ it correctly.
Yeah,
interesting change.
I think it did feel a little bit oppressive, maybe especially in against newer players that are a little bit less familiar with how to counter it. But yeah,
it was really good at dancing around its counters. So that's our main approach.
Okay.
With the acceleration changes overall to the game that are going to be coming as well, it should allow anti-tank guns if the flak is anywhere near, like just not at the very edge of the range, maybe at range 50. You're like that, you will generally be able to take out the flak with the second anti-tank gun shot unless it's upgraded. So this may make it much more difficult for the flak to dance around its counters. But there are also more counters to the flak, like the Humber, going to be available to say the
for the Brits. Yeah.
I don't think it's the best change to the flak, but it's a good one.
Outside of just buffing the tier, we've also made the P3, the Panzer 3, a little bit better. Mostly we've improved its anti-infantry performance by adjusting its machine guns ever so slightly. So that between that and it cheaper, hopefully, you could get them out earlier and they can justify their costs sooner.
Right.
Outside of that, we have some battle group changes. We have a minor change to the Caro, which standardizes its performance with some of the other light vehicles. And then we also have some changes for the Semovente, I believe.
Mainly just a standardization fix, because some effects were not properly applying, and now the Semovente will just track its targets. Because before, if you ran past the Semovente and didn't fire its heat round, it would not rotate.
We fixed that. Right. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Cool.
The big one, though, so the big power spike we're nerfing on the DAC, and it's coming up in the battle groups. It's the L640. So we are essentially not really changing the way it works. It already was geared toward fighting light vehicles to an extent, but we are pretty much removing its anti-infantry capability if you do not buy the flamethrower.
Okay.
One thing we're noticing with the L640 for its timing, it will, and especially when it comes in pairs, it's too good against infantry, but
Yes.
you push it back 1 CP, it's not good enough for its timing.
Mhm.
But if we just made it one tank, one L640 that hits the field, it's still devastating enough.
That caused all kinds of other problems it didn't really fix much. So the idea is we've actually made it a little bit cheaper now, but out the gate, you are no longer getting a dual use unit that you used to before. The guns on the vehicles are now tuned to be basically purely anti-vehicle. There's still a little bit of anti-infantry on the unit because they do have a coax, but it's nothing like it was before. So no more like you immediately see an L640, you retreat, and then you still lose the squad on retreat.
Yeah, it did always feel like this just massive power spike.
Yeah.
This
so
unit
that should be
sounds terrible
That should be
now.
gone. However, you can still have an early game power spike if you bring them out and then you get the flamethrowers on them.
Mhm.
So that's very much still a thing, but that's much more expensive and it's also a bit slower.
Right.
So this
Interesting
way,
change.
players should have much more counterplay.
And
Hopefully.
you can also use your early light vehicles to counter the L640, where before like the double L640 would just outright counter the Humber,
Yeah,
and put some pressure on units like the Greyhound or anti-tank half-track.
yeah.
Wow.
And
So it's really not that good of a
And
unit,
yeah, we
I don't
didn't
like.
feel that there needed to be more anti-infantry units for the DAC. Like you already have Gustatory in the same part
Yes.
of the unlock tree, and there's about 3 other autocannon-based vehicles in
Yeah,
the DAC
yeah.
faction from the 259, the Flak Half-Track, and the 8 Rad. So there didn't need to be more like pressure units that the DAC have that all act very similarly or play very similarly.
Yeah. The other part is by keeping them AT, this is hopefully going to give it a unique role, even if you're past that shock timing of like getting it immediately onto CPs, because the vehicles are still fairly good against a lot of the anti-vehicle units.
Mm.
So we're hoping that's still an option, especially in support of the Guastatori, so that you can kind of use these units as a set and kind of they can mutually support each other.
Interesting.
Or you could just go 4 flamethrowers and just absolutely toast people.
I wonder what the cost is.
Sounds fun. Okay. Anything else about the L640, or do you want to cover the last 2 things?
No. We can move on to the armored support. I think the main change to this was the change to vehicle awareness, right, Darren?
Yeah, so we mainly changed vehicle awareness from just being a passive to the global, just so it provides less information for the DAC over time, but it will allow us to increase the power of vehicle awareness, because we had to tone the range back quite a bit to the point where you didn't really notice it a lot, but by having it as a global that is not always going to be active, it gives us more room to provide it a bit more power, but also for a limited time.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then in a similar vein to Seek and Destroy, we're also making Panzer Storm's speed. We're toning it down ever so slightly, but we're moving some of those stats into other categories. So, for example, its rotation bonus is a little bit higher than it was before, but no more, not as speedy tanks. Not quite. And in terms of Italian combined arms, we have some minor changes in store for this. We're still tracking it because we know there are some issues with it that are a little bit more systemic. And not to get too much into other stuff. The main changes for this one is we nerfed Pact of Steel so that it wasn't quite as like you unlock light vehicle and then just spam light vehicle. It still will be there, but it should be a little bit weaker, and the alternative should be a little bit more attractive.
Okay.
And then we've also brought the artillery cover a little bit back in line because it was a little overpriced for what you got. Especially the delays on it seem to be a little bit overperforming,
Underperforming.
overly long. So now it should feel much more effective as an Overwatch ability of like, hey, I need cover here, and it will properly suppress units in that area.
Yeah, so the big issue with Italian combined arms artillery cover, not only was its price and the fact, of course, it competes with Pact of Steel currently, but it it didn't really provide much of a zoning tool after you took the first shell
Yeah.
from the respective artilleries, either the anti-tank or anti-infantry. It gave the player significant time to just run around in the Overwatch area without taking any fire.
Yeah.
And that's not what we want. These abilities are meant to zone people out, keep them out of specific areas. So that's why we significantly reduced the delay and also increased like the speed of the motor projectile. So when they are coming down, they're also going to hit their targets much faster.
Yep.
Okay,
Good change.
cool. So I think that kind of covers all of the specifics for our changes. Again, let's maybe just kind of quickly touch on your goals here. So it sounds like I said before, like we're really kind of buffing Brits, adjusting some of the battle groups. What are you kind of hoping players will experience with the year one anniversary update, and specifically with a lot of the changes that you've both implemented here?
Yeah, we're trying to again, like, strategic diversity is kind of the goal. It's why we're here, right? Like the idea is the game will be much more interesting to play for everyone if you engage, if there's a variety of strategies that are all viable, or they have interesting interactions with each other. Maybe strat A is good against strat B, and then strat C, et cetera, et cetera. And that's kind of the idea. And we've noticed, particularly in the last patch, over time, we've kind of settled into kind of a rhythm of certain strats just being the thing. So we're hoping we can disrupt these and then introduce some new ones, particularly for the Brits, which will kind of spice up the gameplay for everyone. And in adjustment to all of those new strats, you have new strats coming out, and people can kind of, again, engage with the game in different ways. Yeah, that's kind of the main target of all of these changes. And also the experimental change, the Collins change.
I was going to say, are we getting to that?
Yeah, so I think now is we can finally discuss it a little bit more in detail.
I guess just for some context,
right?
Like
the big deal out of this thing.
The ongoing debate, I think, in the Company of Heroes community has always been around call-ins and essentially how they should be utilized, how they should be unlocked. You know, should they be locked behind tech? You know, like I know our very competitive players have very strong thoughts about these.
Yes, they do.
But I also know that our more social focused players, people who are just maybe a little bit more casually engaging with the game, like really love call-ins because it's kind of like this, great power fantasy and this just very exciting moment in any sort of match. So Darren, I know, or Jason, I know before when we were talking off mic, you kind of said we're trying to experiment with this like middle ground in the sort of debate, because I feel like a lot of the answers that players come up with is sort of like this one or the other.
Yes.
But it seems like you're trying to like walk this middle path. So can you maybe describe what we're doing here?
Yeah. So battle groups offered us a unique opportunity to not quite take a hard line on either one. I know there are a lot of players who do want one or the other, and we do acknowledge that. But right now, the idea is kind of like, can we kind of find a middle ground where we can actually get both kinds of this mechanic in, where you do have the ability to circumvent tech as an interesting way of the battle group interacting with your strategy, right? Like tech skipping, if you see an armored player, that is something that they could potentially do. But at the same time, we don't want to make it, usually one of the biggest problems with these call-ins was that they would be the thing, right? They were often always the best strategy because that's kind of the highlight of the 100% the battle group. There was also this competing issue of like, that's kind of the cool unit. That's kind of the cool thing. So like, you don't want to just nerf it out of existence, because then you're losing a core part of the commander in the past, or the battle group in this case. Right. So the idea now is kind of like, can we find a middle ground where, hey, we allow you to get the unit through tech, but it's balanced differently than if you use the call-in. So the call-in is still available. This way we can balance both separate game styles in a way that we can kind of keep them equivalent, or around the ideas of like, hey, there are different ways of engaging, right?
Yeah.
So like you can either play mechanized or, for example, armored. So that's the two battle groups that have the changes this patch, with a style where you want to deliberately stall for the tech, or for the tech skip. And that's fine. We price it in. We price it in the CPs. We price it in maybe into the cost of the call-in. In reverse, we can also reward players who just want to use the E8, who aren't tech skipping, but by like, hey, you don't pay that extra cost. And by being able to tack a cost onto one thing and a lack of a cost into the different, or by costing them differently, we can equate them in power. So that way you can see both, which that's the hope. There's a difference between on paper and also what happens in practice.
Right.
We've already noted that like both strats can be interesting, and also we also have the other issue of like we have multiple game modes that engage with these things differently. In certain modes or in certain metas, call-ins can be better or worse in certain scenarios, which is also a big challenge for us. We want all of the modes to be interesting and fun and engaging. We don't want it to where like, hey, this is a 1v1 thing, not for 4v4. Too bad. Or the reverse is like, oh, because this is really good in 4v4, you don't get it in 1v1.
Right.
We don't want either.
Right.
So hopefully by giving us more options, we can hopefully get these things in a better state where they're not like game ruining or just not existent.
Right. So let's take a step back and specifically talk about that option in like a practical sense. So Darren, I know when we were looking at the battle group trees, it looked like there was sort of an exclusive choice with both of those calling units. So Darren, can you explain like how does that actually practically work? Like, can I still call it in if I make the choice to have it as part of my sort of the my tech building, or does that sort of separate those options and I have to kind of go one route or the other?
You pretty much have to go one route or the other. So I'm going to go with call-ins or I'm going to build them from the production building. For the most part, at least for the Wehrmacht, the difference between the two Panthers, there's no difference between the two Panthers at all. One just arrives from the call-in because you can possibly tech skip by playing extended Wehrmacht tier 2 or tier 3, and with using the other call-ins in the mechanized battle group. For the Americans, it's a bit different. So they have the ability for their Shermans to call in with the engineer squad, but they also have the ability to now just build the E8 from the tank depot, which is also can be impacted by some of the abilities that are also in the armored battle group. So you got War Machine and Fast Deploy, and that is why like the E8 is costed a bit more in field than the Panther, or at 110, because it is likely going to have that discounted manpower price over time.
Interesting.
Whereas the call-in for the E8 that actually has a lower field cost, but it has that higher CP cost because you obviously need to unlock it, and it has the higher manpower, always just has the higher manpower cost because it comes with those engineers on the back.
So I guess like from a player perspective, if I'm looking at this choice, I guess I basically have the option of, okay, do I just sort of hold out, hoard my resources, and then go for the call-in option? Maybe I'm on the back foot and I just kind of need to stall for a little bit. Or am I feeling like confident and, you know what, I actually just want this as an option as part of my production building? Is that sort of the choice that we're now offering?
That's the choice that you are generally making in terms of do I want to stall out, or do I want to just play the game normally, get all my production buildings, and eventually have this unit at the end. And this is going to make these units like the Panther and E8 appear a lot more in team games, because generally you're able to escalate your resource lead much better than you are in 1v1 and then get to your end game production structure much faster. And depending on like how much action there is, team games you generate a bit less CP than 1v1 because you are constantly fighting in a
Depends.
1v1. Unless you're always going to help your friend. So.
Unless you're that guy who just keeps running his infantry and losing everything.
But just going back to your point, Jason, about cost, because let me actually change screens here. So if you look at the tree, it doesn't look like the right option has a CP cost. So that is essentially
a zero.
A free
right
choice.
now it's zero. So that's very much on purpose. And that's the current major price difference. For the mechanized, that's the only difference right now. But there is a minor cost difference for the armored one because the call-in comes with engineers as well. But you don't build engineers when you build it manually. But this also comes to the idea of like not punishing non-tech skipping players trying to get the unit. So like one of the complaints we've seen in team games, for example, is, hey, I don't get the chance to use the E8 much because it's so hard to kind of factor in, because going like mass light vehicles wasn't as viable, for example, in team games. So going that strat of like mass light vehicles and kind of stalling until 20, 25 minutes and then going into E8 just wasn't that good in 4v4, which kind of made the E8 straight up just harder to get in the team game, which was kind of a shame, right? We didn't want that. So the idea now is like, and that was kind of the issue with like these vehicle call-ins as well, was the idea that if you wanted to get the Panther or the E8, the best way to maximize that using that vehicle in your strategy almost always revolved around tech skipping. That's the best way to get the most value, right? And we had to balance around that, because if we didn't, then they would be really OP in the scenarios where you were tech skipping. But now, now the idea is we don't have to do that anymore. We can balance these two paths separately. And maybe in the future, we might have to give them a CP cost, or maybe we have to adjust the cost even more. But the idea is that we can now do them separately, which gives us the ability to balance them separately.
Right.
Which allows us to change that power for each player differently. So hopefully for like, let's say if we break players down into 3 camps here, if you were playing team games kind of more casually and you want to engage with the units, this is significantly more accessible. You no longer need to wait until you get to the 20, 25 minute mark, especially if it's a slower game, to get an E8. I think it's currently 3 CPs quickest if you really, really want it early. 3 CPs, and then you have to get the tech costs.
Right.
So it's more tech cost constraint than CP. So, and for the Panther, I think it's 6 or 5, something similar. So that way in team games, if you're a casual player, you can get them early. Then you have the more competitive, but you'll also have the non-1v, like hardcore 1v1 tech skipping players. You can now incorporate these units into your strategy, but you have to build them through the hard tech. So you can, for example, you can be like, I will fast tech to tier 4 as Wehrmacht, but I will get Panthers. Like Panther Broombar combo, for example.
Right.
And you're no longer punished. Yeah. And then finally, you can still do tech skipping, because we didn't remove that from the game. And that still very much it has its presence in, for example, high-level multiplayer.
Right. Darren, I'm kind of curious, like Darren, what do you think some of the results are going to be from this change? Like, do you think, or like, how do you envision players sort of interacting with these systems?
I primarily see this being more impactful in the team game area, because that's where people generally want these bigger and heavier vehicles to appear, or that's where they will primarily shine, because you will be able to unlock them, and it will be able to like surprise players, or like, oh, the guy went Matilda, but now the Wehrmacht has an option in one of their battle groups to counteract that with just like a very early Panther, or because that is available. But it does have some use in 1v1 as well in the traditional or like built old play style, because maybe you went down like the entire right tree of mechanized to focus on that, and maybe you started only just going into the left tree, but you have your tier up. It's going to be much easier to say get the Panther or E8 out in those sort of scenarios, also where you have decided to go the other tree.
Yeah.
So it should also make it's so that like getting these units, like you don't have to just, all right, I have to go down this side of the tree from the start of the game aim to the very end before I can unlock that. Like, I can't touch anything on the other side of the tree, or that will just eat up too many of my command points before I can unlock these like heavy end game vehicles.
Right. Yeah, I definitely found myself sort of like looking at that bottom of the tree and being like, all right, I'm just gonna have to save all my CP to get there.
It should also create a bit more, also I guess, end game diversity for the factions, even in 1v1. So you'll have the Panther, so that will counter like units like the newly updated Grant, the Matilda. I can fight off the Hellcat and deal with most of the Sherman variants, but in return, it does provide an interesting thing, because the Panther itself is primarily anti-armor vehicle, but unlike the Panzer IV, or it can't really deal with infantry as well. Whereas the E8 is a more premium tank and does well against everything, but obviously you pay that premium for building it normally from the tank depot over like the specialist dozer, the standard cheaper standard Sherman, or the specialist anti-tank Hellcat.
Okay. And in terms of like playstyle, we've always wanted the heavy armor battle groups to kind of have two play styles of like either it enabled you to kind of go harder into mid-game units, which was the role of tech skipping, right? We wanted to have a playstyle where, hey, you can go like okay, maybe not 6, but like 3 Chaffies and a Greyhound and really play for that for like 20 minutes and then go into your late game vehicles. We wanted that to be viable, but we also didn't want that to be the only way you could engage with the battle group, which for a lesser or a longer extent, that's kind of been the case. The idea is that the armored battle group for US in particular can also support this idea of like this late game juggernaut of like you have really good Shermans that are better than everyone else's and like quite a few powerful abilities to support them. Like Strength and Steel has been slept on a little bit because it's 1 CP cost higher originally, but the idea that allows you to have a larger maximum army, which is really cool, but you know, in a limited scenario. And then also we have like Field Repairs, which is a really powerful ability, but it hasn't been used as much because people are rushing to War Machine, for example.
Right.
But now we wanted so that like, hey, no, we want to allow you to go for that late game style. Maybe not in all of your 1v1 games, but maybe in your 2v2, 3v3s. Like there's a play style where like, hey, my teammate goes something early and they help me scale into something where I'm stronger late. And we, you know, that's kind of the vision.
Yeah.
But we know there's quite a lot of steps before we get there. We're not thinking like, oh, this change will immediately fix everything.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is the nature of balance. We want to be making changes, but this is kind of like where we want to go. Right. We want to go to a place where there's plenty of strategies and also there's plenty of dynamics where like you have emphasis on early strength, late game strength, mid game strength. And you can choose as a player like what you want to do and also what your opponents do, and you have to kind of back and forth.
Okay.
And that's the perfect vision, but that's the blue sky of us designers.
Yeah.
You know?
Insert the Thanos meme of perfectly balanced. Jason, I think one of the things you said is that this is also an experimental change.
Yes.
But I think the team is open to trying this out, maybe doing more of it, maybe doing less of it, maybe adjusting it in the future. So, did you have any sort of anything else that you wanted to say around that, just to maybe so that we're not scaring people with this changes today?
Yeah. So, what's the best way of putting this? Like this is an experimental change, like we're calling it such. So we're going to be tracking like, hey, does it make the game better? Does it make the game worse?
I like this.
All
man.
that
That's
I ask
good.
is that I hope players engage with it with a bit of an open mind. Test it a little bit back and forth if it's strong or if it's weak. And then we'll kind of adjust depending on how people react to it, how people engage with it. And yeah, pretty much.
The big thing is like you're not losing in your anything in your battle group in return for having this.
We gave you something extra.
The battle group system allows us to do this. Where if we were to do this in Company of Heroes 2, we'd have to remove one of the abilities.
Yes.
Commanders have 5 items and they're all in a linear tree. There is no pick option between.
Yeah,
the
this is a
items.
unique opportunity that the battle group system kind of offered us. So yeah.
All right, so here are the year 1 anniversary 1.5.0 patch notes. We're going to take it from the top here and then dig into the most important parts of the update. To celebrate the 1-year anniversary of Company of Heroes 3, we have remade and reintroduced several classic maps from the franchise's history into the game. Additionally, we have created 2 variants of existing maps specifically designed for co-op and custom games. This update will also allow players to customize their profiles with new badges, banners, and titles. In our ongoing efforts to improve the feel of Company of Heroes, we have also made small changes to pathfinding and acceleration. Please note that this work is still ongoing. Based on player feedback of replays, we have introduced 2 new quality of life changes to the feature. From the perspective of multiplayer balance, our primary objective is to enhance the strategic diversity of the British forces. Notable adjustments include significant improvements to understand units like the Humber and Grant, aimed at boosting their effectiveness. Core upgrades, such as the Bren gun and the team weapon light vehicle training, have also been refined to enhance the performance of essential army units. Additionally, we're reshaping 2 battle groups to bolster their overall ability. The Wehrmacht Mechanized and U.S. Forces Armored Battle Group have undergone a restructure, and both will introduce an experimental change for Panther and Easy 8 Collins. So we just went through that in the live stream. Really interesting stuff. Like they said here, this is a big change to the British in particular, So they're taking their time to focus this update primarily on the Brits. It's not as big of a faction redesign as I had initially thought, but some pretty good changes to units overall. And the one thing that I do really like about this update, and they've emphasized this over and over ad nauseum in the live stream, is options, build order options. And I think compared to other RTS games, one thing that Company of Heroes can improve a lot in, and one thing that Company of Heroes 3 has done a good job in overall compared to the CO2, for example, is build orders. I think having build order options is extremely important in Company of Heroes in any RTS game. So for me, as a StarCraft player who's come from StarCraft, who's focused primarily on Company of Heroes now, I like to have the optionality of different pathways based on maps, based on matchups, based on playstyles. I want to have the options, and they're providing that with some pretty interesting creative ways, and the call-in experimental change is one of those. So very cool. New content and features. So we have, of course, we've gone over this over the past week, Semois 1v1, Outskirts 2v2, classic maps, guys, some of the best. Montherme 3v3. I don't remember this map very much, but it looks very cool when you look at it from a tactical map perspective, the way the VPs are split, the way the spawns are split. Very interesting. River Crossing, this is for co-op versus AI, kind of like a redesign. And then Sioux Stronghold, also a redesign for co-op versus AI. So Sangro River Crossing, Sioux Stronghold, both redesigns that I think will be really interesting for co-op versus AI, for players, especially getting into the game and trying to onboard into Company of Heroes. These are going to be easier. And what I like about this is for new players, if you're playing solely versus AI on these maps and you move on to multiplayer, well, Wetlands and River Crossing, they're going to look familiar to you at least. You're going to have some familiarity with a different variant in the competitive aspect. So I do like that. Now, community maps. We are pleased to introduce the first round of community maps as part of Company of Heroes 3's first anniversary. The following maps have been hand-selected and invited into a program of feedback and iteration before receiving a final polish from our design and art teams. Official community maps are recognizable by a green badge, author credit, and a hand symbol in custom match and skirmish lobbies. Map selection and the loading screen. Okay, so we're getting these community maps for the first time, which I think is fantastic. We've been asking for this basically since launch because there was such a small map pool. The community map contest that Greyshot did was really cool for me to see in particular because you got to see kind of a process of these maps from start to finish. And I think there are some really talented people in the community. I want to thank a lot of the map makers for the hard work. It's not easy to make these maps. I know a couple map makers that I've talked to personally, and just seeing how much effort and analysis they put into it for no return other than glory and being cemented into the game and having that notoriety. They're doing it for the community. So thank you very much, guys, for the hard work. Love to see more of the classic map makers like White Flash get some maps into the game. It would be great to see. But let's go ahead and take a look here. We have Famenville 1v1, classic. We've seen this a lot in competitive modes. And then Steps 4v4. Steps in Code 2 was a really interesting map. I believe it was the first map in the game, or one of the first maps. Really interesting. I really like the change to the North African theme. And I think they made some really important changes to the map in particular that are going to make it just better than Steps was in Code 2 for Code 3 as well. So I think it's not only like a redesign of the map, but it's an improvement from a gameplay perspective, not just a visual perspective. So as a 4v4 enthusiast, I love 4v4. I love the team dynamic of Company of Heroes. It's the best in the genre. I'm really excited for maps like this. I was like expecting Red Ball Express for some reason. I love that map. I don't know if you guys also love that map or if it's a polarizing map, if it's split with the community. But I can see how Steps is a safer option than Red Bull because of kind of like the open terrain and open territory of the desert. Okay, profile customization. We went over this in detail in the last update, so I'm not going to go into this too much. But badges, titles, and banners. What I would really like to see here is it's a good start. It's a good fundamental start. We're getting some more profile customization, some more aesthetic, some more flair for players. I would like to see some more unique and historical references added to the game. In the store, through challenges, I would like to see just a lot more options. And some of the graphics were just taken from old shots or trailers, which is fine for the starting material. But I would really like to see more historical references in the future, and that goes for the store too. The cosmetics in the store, random cosmetics and skins are not as interesting to me. But things that have historical reference and significance, that have a relation to the units that we are playing in game, is I think ideal. Okay, so 4 badges. We went over these: the Berserker, Grenadier, Half Screw, and Rifleman. If you guys want to see these badges, these titles, go and check out my last video covering, previewing these features and updates. 2 banners, we saw these as well. Challenges, some big challenges coming up, guys. I like that they're doing like community-wide challenges where we have to work together to accomplish. So, between February 27th and March 5th, we have to deploy 12 million units, along with these other challenges. And if we do that, we unlock a pretty cool badge, in my opinion. Probably the coolest one that they're offering. So let's go ahead and do our best to try and get that. I don't know how hard that is. I'm assuming it's relatively easy based on the statistics they've looked at, but I really do hope we can hit that 12 million target. Okay, gameplay and feature improvements, maps. Okay, adjusted audio, adjusted heavy cover, Monte Carlo's compound. Bridges will no longer appear as icons in the minimap. Updated cover on the concrete trenches on Winterline and other maps. So we're gonna have to look into these maps like Monte Carlo and Winterline to see exactly what changes have been made. It's too hard to tell here. It's too basic. Updated Pacino Stalemate with audio tracks. Updated Villafiore atmosphere. Various updates to Toronto coastline. Okay, so guys, if you want to check these out in more detail, take a look at this map list and then go into the game, jump into the game, and try and find exactly what they changed. Pathfinding. We continue to work on pathfinding improvements and releasing changes as they are ready. For this update, we wanted to address vehicle reversing. When issuing forward movements, we want vehicles to follow a path with small direction deviations. Smooth curve so that they do not lose speed. This means that our path searching algorithm doesn't follow the shortest path. However, for reverse movement, precision, and direct movement, it is often more important to get out of harm's way quicker. As such, for reverse movements, our path searching algorithm will try to stick to the shortest path when possible. Vehicles now follow tighter paths when forced reversing. I think this is a really interesting change because previously we had crazy acceleration. Units almost looked a little silly. So I think it's a welcome change overall. Pathfinding has improved a lot. So I think this is just continuing to work and improve upon what we would expect. Replays, we're happy to see players have responded positively to Code 3 implementation. We're happy to announce 2 new features coming to replays along with various bug fixes that should make the experience more consistent and enjoyable. Playback panel can now be faded out when in collapse and high player elements. This feature works similar to the cinematic mode button. Okay, a new reveal map, all players option has been introduced to the playback panel. It's a very popular feature in other strategy titles that reveals the vision of all players while retaining the fog of war in areas where none of the players can see. Yeah, very good change. Okay, so some small improvements to replays, added features. Bug fixes, yeah, there were some pretty bad bug fixes. So during replays, the tactical map can now be opened when the camera is off, and then fixed icons for the tactical combined arms. Okay. Vehicle acceleration. Okay, so we kind of touched on this earlier with the reversing, but our recent acceleration changes to vehicles were meant to improve the responsiveness of the game. While we think of controlling vehicles ended up feeling snappier, it was slightly overtuned. Right, it was. We're now having the value as a middle ground. Okay, so slope of speed increase from 0.8 to 0.4. Start speed from 0.3 to 0.5. Okay, so they're literally having everything here. Time before vehicle acceleration kicks in 0.625 to 0.25. Okay, I think, like I said, I think this was a little bit overtuned and looked a little silly. So it should be a good medium here, happy medium. All right, multiplayer balance. We talked about this a lot in the live stream. These call-in changes, but let's look at anti-infantry strafing runs. Recent fixes to strafing runs and how they apply damage has resulted in these abilities doing less damage than they intended for the infantry strafes. The following changes can bring them back to previous power level. Damage increase from 20 to 35. So a lot more damage for these runs, which is a lot more lethal, to be more careful. Kate Collins, we talked about this a lot, guys, but I just want to make a couple points. I really love the fact that they are deciding to experiment, and I really appreciate them doing this because you don't see this out of most companies, and especially RTS games. They take forever to change and to update, let alone add new features that are subject to scrutiny, right? So I think this is a really cool change. It adds, once again, that layer of build order and optionality for the specific battle group and faction. I can already think of a lot of different implications. They alluded to team games and especially 3v3s and 4v4s, where you can escalate your tech much quicker. I find it very interesting that I can skip the call-in, rush up to Tank Depot, and then immediately pump out an Easy 8 instead of, let's say, a Bulldozer or a Hellcat, of course, for the added costs. Whereas normally I wouldn't be able to get that Easy 8 till much later. And because of that, the consequence is I'm relying more on the Tank Depot units than the Easy 8, even though I went for Armored Battle Group. So same thing with the Panther. I really like this change. Now, what it's going to depend upon is the balance of the specific unit, right? Is the unit from the tech building, if you decide to go that route instead of the call-in, is that unit viable? What's the price? What's the cost? What's the production time? What's, how quickly can you get that unit out? And I'm assuming you can get it out much quicker than the call-in. So if you can get it out much quicker than the call-in and it's not too expensive in terms of its cost relative to the call-in, I think it's viable and very cool. I think it's a cool option. Now, on the other side, the strength of the call-in is being able to get the Easy 8 out in a reasonable time as a call-in while skipping the last tech tier, tier 3, the Tank Depot, for example, for the Easy 8. What this allows you to do, and with the Panther as well, both the Easy 8 and the Panther, you're skipping the last tech tier building and structure, and instead of investing your resources in that tech and escalating up to the late game tech quicker, what you're doing is you have an extended tier 2, right, time frame where you're investing your resources not in technology to escalate up to tier 3. That building costs a lot of manpower and fuel. That manpower and fuel is being invested earlier into tier 2 and building up that tempo in tier 2. So that's the advantage of the call-in. And then you're able to, because you have more invested in tier 2 units, you can engage the enemy more. And by engaging the enemy more, you gain more command points. And therefore, you're able to get up to that call-in relatively quick or in a reasonable timing. And you cut a lot of corners in terms of resources. So the question is, how balanced are these two options in terms of the cost of the unit? That, in my mind, very interested to see this, very excited about it. Faction balance. Okay, U.S. forces. Only a few changes are being made to the U.S. forces to improve the viability of the air support center, slightly nerfing the Chaffee, and adjusting the armored battle group, as we've talked about. Okay, so 4x4, this is the Jeep. The Scout Commander, upgrade time increased from 10 to 30. That's huge. And seems more balanced to me. 10 seconds is ridiculous. Okay, air supply upgrade, cost decrease from 150 and 40 fuel to 125 manpower and 30 fuel. So pretty substantial. It's not that substantial. I mean, the fuel is a much bigger deal than the manpower. 10 fuel is a lot, especially when you're looking for that motor pool tech timing and Greyhound timings, Chaffee timings are very important. So interesting. American Air Support Center P-47 strafing run with anti-air in a better state. They're basically buffing the strafing run because it has a counterplay, as they said. Damage increased from 20 to 40, so it's double. Delay for the second plane decreased from 4 to 3. Munition cost decreased from 60 to 50. Pretty cool. Really, really cool. I don't know how strong this is going to be with the counterplay, especially as you scale into the late game. Anti-air becomes more prominent. I don't know how viable this still is, but I like to see it getting some love. Grasshopper Recon Run, we've reworked the way ASC Recon works, giving a vision at all levels and reversing the high level and low level planes. I think it's a cool change. The high and low level planes are really cool. So advanced air reconnaissance increases plane health by 1,000 and increases vision radius by 15. Okay, and now provides vision from the start, no longer detects enemies in the fog of war. So I guess, I thought it was a really cool feature. I loved the feature. It was like a very cheap way to get intel, and you kind of had to put the pieces together. You could see an infantry or a tank icon. I really love this feature, but I could see how it's not as intuitive and not as beneficial. So they were giving you vision at both levels, but adjusting the air level of the plane. So it's basically its resilience and survivability. I hope to see this type of reconnaissance back, though. I really love the icons in the Fog of War. I think it's just a really cool feature, but not a huge deal. Okay, M4A1 Sherman medium tank. High explosive round munition cost decreased from 45 to 30. So once again, not much. Bulldozer now properly takes reduced damage from mines by 50% and will not take mine criticals while active. Speed penalty increased to 40% when the dozer blade is active. Sherman dozer no longer starts with its dozer blade deployed. Interesting. Okay. M8 Scott vertical tracking speed increased from 15 to 35. So based on the changes in the armor battle group, you can still get this out, I think, around the same timing, if I'm not mistaken, because it's technically the same, 3 total CPs. But this vertical tracking speed is a pretty substantial buff. M24 Chaffee light tank. We've noted the power of the Chaffee in certain modes and matchups, but we're currently going after some of the enablers, which is the U.S. armor battle group, that employing these units is so strategically powerful. Yeah, so it's not necessarily the Chaffee. It is the armored battle group, War Machine, and the other abilities that make the Chaffee spammable and just super strong, high tempo. Okay. M2A1, howitzer emplacement, barrage increase from 250 to 300, wind-up decrease from 0.25 to 0. Yeah, super necessary. I felt like this unit is also very weak in terms of its health and resilience, so I'm surprised to not see more buffs there. But, yeah, especially compared to the Obiche, but a range increase of this magnitude is welcomed. Still feel like it's probably a little weak, but it's hard to say. U.S. Forces, battle groups, P-47 Special Operations Strafing Run is now a loiter, converted to a loiter that lasts for 60 seconds. Pretty long. That's really long when you think about zoning out an area. Munition cost increased from 100 to 110, so only 10 munition increase. Only targets infantry, deals damage and suppression. Dude, this is a really strong buff, I feel like. Super strong and really cool tactically to be able to zone out an area. And tactically engage the enemy in other areas, or take control of that area. Armored Battle Group, new ability unlocks M4 Sherman production. So we knew about this. Okay, cost 0 command points to unlock. We knew that. Alternative pick to the standard Sherman. Okay. Okay, so here we go. The M4A3 Easy 8 Sherman build cost set to 440 and 110. So not that expensive when you think about it. I mean, it's a lot of manpower, but I feel like, compared to the 90 cost of the Sherman, not bad. Not bad. I feel like this is going to be pretty viable, but time will tell. I mean, it is highly benefiting from upgrades from the armored battle group or from abilities, so it's obviously going to be really powerful. It has to be technically more expensive than a Panzer IV, I imagine, but I feel like this is a fair cost. Fast deploy, we have reverted the command point change of fast deploy to reduce the pressure. Yep, so no longer being able to just spam jeeps from the get-go. Seek and destroy, accuracy bonus increase from 35% to 40%. Reload bonus increase from 25 to 30. Speed bonus decrease from 50 to 35%. Easy 8 Sherman Combat Group decrease from 8 to 7 command points, so you can call it in a little bit easier. M8 Scott command point, yep, from 3 to 2, but still roughly the same command point cost total to get to it. Okay, big changes to the Brits, guys. British forces are receiving many changes. Okay, we talked about these. Churchill heavy tank population requirement decrease from 18 to 16. Reload time decrease from 4.7 to 4.25. So population decrease is big, especially when you consider the timing and the fact that you want to spam a few of these out because you're relying on this. You're oftentimes skipping your tech as well. And then the fact that it's shooting quicker, I think that's good because you're going to be able to I mean, that kind of like compounds. You're going to be able to get in fights quicker and stay in fights at scale. So if you have 2 to 3 Churchills, this becomes even exponentially stronger, right? So I feel like being able to spam a few of these is going to be better now. Crusader AA medium tank, area of effect increased from 2 to 2.5. Area of effect distance increased from 0.3 to 0.5. Okay, so yeah, they're basically putting this on par with the Whirlwind. So I like to see this get a little bit above. I love this unit. It's one of my favorite medium tanks from the British. Okay, CWT, CAA truck. Pulson 20 millimeter anti-air conversion cost increased from 60 to 45. So I don't know why I kept saying AA. It's just AA. Dingo Scout car. We want to keep the unique aspect of the Dingo being a combat scout vehicle. So its main changes are focused on weapon responsiveness and increased firepower. We have slightly increased the cost of the Dingo due to its potency against early game threats. With raw engineers having increased capture rate, just allows the British to take map control with the Dingo. Some big changes here. Accuracy increased. Firearm time modifier at long range decreased. Firing cone increased from 5 to 15. Triple. Front and side armor decreased from 5 to 4.5. Health increased from 220 to 235. It's decent. Manpower increased from 250 to 265. Not much. That's not a bad cost increase. Moving cooldown modifiers from 0.5 to 1. Ready aim decreased from 0.5 to 0.125. Weapon horizontal traverse speed increased from 25 to 60. Pretty big. Weapons no longer begin to reface when targets are acquired. It will now reset to its default position at 4 seconds. So that will make it easier to micro as well. So this unit, guys, once again, Brits don't have very many options. You're usually either opening with like a double engineer opening or infantry section openings, or maybe an MG opening with sections or MGs. But the Dingo was really hard to utilize early because there was no... You made too much of a sacrifice in terms of map control, right? You can't cap with it like the other factions, like the Jeep, for example, in the previous patch. And its combat effectiveness was kind of limited to your ability to micro it. So I really like the fact that they're giving you a buff here so that you have an option to use this unit early, hit hard with it early, combat the 250s, combat the Jeeps, combat MGs from the Wehrmacht. But also with the armored battle group, you're able now to also refit this unit for Humbers and for tier 2 tech, or to reinvest in your infantry sections. Opening double Dingo, combating against a DAC player, combating the 250s really well, hard countering it, refitting those Dingos, and then taking that manpower, reinvesting in your sections for better scalability. That's just one idea. There's many ideas I have about how you could utilize this unit. It's just really cool. Once again, more build order options, and I think it's fantastic. Foot guards are receiving some minor improvements. So health increase from 110 to 115. Thompson accuracy increase from 0.58 to 0.64. This unit's becoming even better as an anti-infantry unit. I don't love that idea of this unit just being good against everything. Like, I would have liked to see more focus on its anti-tank to make this unit more of an anti-tank role. But yeah, or maybe locking this Thompson behind an upgrade or something like that. Yeah, anyways, this is fine. Humbered armored car, probably one of my favorite updates and changes that I've seen so far. I love this unit. I love the idea of getting a unit out very quickly that has some strengths for window period of time, and very specific application. But the Humber was just too weak, and they alluded to it in the live stream. But really happy to see this unit getting some love. So the Humber will remain fragile to anti-tank weapons, but will have increased vision range and speed to escape threats. We've also raised the accuracy of the Humber against infantry units. And so, once again, I think this unit's going to have just a lot more versatility in that early to mid game. So 15 millimeter machine gun accuracy increased, area of effect increased substantially, armor increased, field across decreased from 35 to 30. That's good. Incremental accuracy removed. Mark area ability now provides vision around the flare, but does not see through sight blockers. Mark area now displays the affected aura around it. Sight increase from 40 to 45. Speed increase from 8.1 to 8.3. So not a huge speed increase, but a good enough speed increase to hunt down those vehicles and so forth. So really cool. I'm really looking forward to this unit in particular. Infantry sections. Brand guns are the primary combat upgrade from the infantry section. So we're going to get some good incentive to use the Bren. Build time decreased from 28 to 25. Reinforced time for all models standardized to 4.5. Bren gun cost decreased from 100 to 90. Bren accuracy increased. Bren cooldown decreased. So no added utility to the Bren. It's just going to be much more effective and cheaper. I think that's very good to see. Light vehicle training, bonus change to plus 15% accuracy, plus 25% acceleration and rotation rate. Increased veterancy experience gain from 800 to 1200. Very cool. Higher incentive to be going for this. I'm surprised we didn't see more changes to the armory for the British, the upgrades. But maybe we'll see that in the future. M3 Grant medium tank. Okay, we talked about this a lot over the past week and in the live stream. This unit is going to have just a much better, I think, role as the end game, late game tank for the Brits. Going to be much more formidable against those medium to advanced medium Axis tanks. So it's getting a lot of changes here. You guys can look through these changes to the turrets, the reload times, penetration rates. This unit is basically getting buffed across the board. Health increase from 720 to 840. And yeah, I think this is going to be a very interesting unit and hopefully has enough incentive to pick over the Matilda. I know players and teammates that I have, like Tehran, love the Crusader. It's a guerrilla style tactic unit, hit and run, very mobile, packs a punch. I like more of the Matilda. I find it just super resilient. You could really kind of situate your army around it. And I love the Matilda. I never found a reason to go for the Grant. I don't even think I've ever built one, to be honest. At least not in a video. Yeah, I don't think I have. So I'm curious to really test this unit out, especially at scale. As you produce a few of them, it gets stronger and stronger because there's 2 turrets. So when you have 3 of them, it's not 3 turrets, it's 6 turrets, right? So just think about the impact that can have. M3 Stuart light tank. Some small changes here to the tread shot we talked about. So they're just standardizing that, making it easier. Requisition 17 pounder range tank on unlock. Cost decrease from 125 and 25 fuel to 100 manpower and 15 fuel. I think that's a good change. Royal Engineer section, so their health is going to be increased and their capture rate increased by 25% roughly here. So I think having the option to go for engineer openings and to rely on them at scale, and especially in the armored battle group, is very cool. I want to see more of that, and I'm happy to see that getting some love. Team weapon training, bonus damage or bonus change to plus 20% cooldown and reload speed and plus 15 health. Veterancy reward remains the same. Okay, so Vicar focused gunnery range increase from 50 to 55. Suppression penalty from 60 to 25%. Suppression penalty no longer affects suppression radius and nearby suppression modifier. Vickers HMG build time decreased from 40 to 30. So just build time change there. This focus gunnery is interesting. But yeah, not major changes to the HMG for the Brits. British Forces battle groups. We talked about the armored battle group in the live stream. DAC. Some big changes to the DAC here. Relatively big. 254 armored tractor. Lockdown mortar brush shell count decreased from 24 to 14. So it's no longer going to be able to have those insane wipes. At least I don't think it could. But 250 light carrier. Frontal armor decreased from 7 to 5.5. Also applies to the motor variant. That's a huge decrease, to be honest. It's going to make the Dingo much stronger against it. And just easier to combat without like soft AT. 250 20mm autocannon variant armor unchanged. Okay. Which is fair. You know, you're paying for that upgrade. You don't want it to be weaker now. Armored reserves, the cost of the non-Tiger columns have been reduced, which makes a lot of sense because you want to have some incentive for the column other than going for the stock unit. Caro, we're making some changes to the car to reduce its performance against infantry. So the 47mm fire actually corrected. Model damage limit decreased from 3 to 2. I think it's fair. Caros at scale or just in mass were way too strong. Way too strong, in my opinion. You could just keep pumping these things out, and they were just brutally difficult to deal with. So happy to see that. Recovery half-track venture requirements decreased. Flak 36 range, ramage, it's not even a word. Range increased from 70 to 75. I like to see range increases for these emplacements. I think it's really good, especially for the Wehrmacht flak that's stationary. Flak Furling half track. Okay, this is an important one. We're reducing its speed and acceleration, making it more difficult for you to escape its counter. So acceleration decreased from 3.25 to 2.5. Speed decreased from 6.9 to 6.2. So pretty substantial. Not the most like fundamental change to the unit. I was talking to Hunter and some other top players, and Hunter in particular had some really interesting ideas to change for this. They didn't go with those ideas, but I think it's a good start. Maybe changing the speed and acceleration of this unit fixes the problem. You know, anti-tank guns and anti-tank are going to be a lot easier to use. It's going to require you to go for the smoke upgrade much more, so much quicker, I assume. So it's still going to have the ability to be evasive as well. Medium tank, Flampanzer 3, front armor increase from 130 to 150. Panzer 3 assault group, cost decrease from 600 manpower and 80 fuel to 500 manpower and 60 fuel. Okay, interesting. Panzer 3 medium tank, machine gun damage increased from 3 to 5. Machine gun accuracy increased from 0.45 to 0.65. Okay. So hopefully the Panzer 3 is not only better against infantry, but you know, I just want to see this tank more viable. I want to be able to get up to tier 3 as DAC much more and be able to spam out a bunch of these units. Because they're not as strong as their counterparts, I feel like you should be able to get up to the unit and pump out a couple of them, 2 to 3 of them, you know, relatively easier than we can. Right now, there's no incentive to play tier 2 DAC, play tier 3 DAC, I'm sorry. You want to stay in tier 2 most of the time until the late game. So more incentive for the Panzer 3 is important. And especially because you are still required to go for the upgrades, which are costly, if you want to make this unit viable. So, good change. Panzer 4 and Stug G assault groups cost decrease from 600 manpower and 80 fuel to 500 manpower and 70 fuel. Good change. The manpower cost in particular was kind of heavy. Panzer Command cost decrease from 350 and 130 fuel to 300 manpower and 120 fuel. Panzer Jaeger Squad. So this is an interesting change. We are significantly improving the role as an anti-vehicle unit by increasing their rate of fire and responsiveness. Their ability also has been slightly increased to help them against area of effect weapons. So health increased by 5. Ready aim time from 1.25 to 0.75. Aim time decreased from 0.5 to 0.25. Anti-tank tear gas round ability cost from 45 to 30. So reload time, aim time, all changed here, guys. You can check this out in more detail, but I don't know how I feel about this unit. I don't like to see this unit spammed very much. To see it getting buffed is a little concerning to me, but I'm not like a very high-level DAC player. You know, I'm much better with the other factions. I don't know exactly what implications this will have, but I personally don't like to see this unit and AT rifles in general being spammed. So I hope that that's not the result of this, because it can become a very cheap and effective way to skip fuel tech, anti-tank tech, and just kind of rely on cheap anti-tank infantry. But it'll be interesting to see. I'm curious to see this. Semivente, I love the unit. Heat shot now slows the vehicle speed by 80% and rotation by 40% for 5 seconds. That's a cool change. It's going to make the unit more viable for sure, I feel like. Heat shot will now force the Semivente to keep tracking its target. Very cool. I like that change to the Semivente. Stug D vertical tracking speed increase from 17 to 35. pretty good, but double. The Africa Corps battle group, so Italian infantry, L6, double Colin. So L6 are receiving a major change here. I don't know how I feel about this one. It wasn't the exact change I would have gone for, but I think it's interesting because now the unit has a very specific application and role within the battle group. Guasatori, highly effective against infantry. The L6 was highly effective against infantry and light vehicles. Now it's specific to vehicles. So you still have the Guasatori, which you can rely on, but you're going to want to be a lot safer with the L6s. Use them as sort of like a reactionary unit, kind of with the Guasatori perhaps, or with your main Panzer Grenadiers. But now it's going to be, I feel like, much more of a reactionary unit that's tracking enemy vehicles with its quick speed. Very interesting to see this, how this pans out. I still like that it's a double column because I feel like it's cool and unique. So overall, perhaps it's a good change. The change is now, cost is now changed to 475 manpower and 35 fuel to 425 manpower and 50 fuel. Oh, wow. So cheaper on manpower, more on fuel. I don't know about this. I don't know how viable this is going to be. L6 speed reduced from 7.5 to 7.2, so it's slower. Mono damage limit reduced from 3 to 1. Curious to see if this is going to get any love. I feel like this unit is going to be like a panic unit if you need it. I don't know if I would be fitting this into my build order over the standard faction units. I don't know. We'll see. I would love to hear your guys' opinion on this change. Armored support, salvage. Battlefield salvage duration increased from 45 to 60. Munition cost decreased from 150 to 125. Panzer IV command tank. Command point cost decreased from 4 to 3. Panzer Storm, Seek and Destroy, are having their speed bonuses reduced to make it easier to intercept, run down units. Acceleration bonus increased from 20 to 30%. Decorator indicator updated from offensive to speed. Rotation bonus increased from 20 to 25%. Speed bonus decreased from 50 to 35%. So vehicle awareness, we have reworked this ability to keep be a global active, allowing us to increase the range of the detection aura without providing constant reconnaissance of enemy vehicles through the fog of war. Active for 60 seconds, 120-second recharge time. Change from passive ability to an active timed ability, which I like. Command point cost decrease from 2 to 1. Cost 50 munitions. Range increase from 60 to 70. So cool. Kind of fits within that vehicle awareness theme. It's a timed ability now with specific application. Italian combined arms, strafing run, bonus damage against vehicles increased from 100% to 250%. Very interesting. Yeah, this was like did no damage to vehicles at all. So I personally like this. I feel like it's a cool change. Seems kind of strong. Once again, I know this strafe came in always very quickly. That's the one thing I really loved about it. So we'll see. Italian combined armed artillery cover. They talked about this in the live stream. The delay between barrages now decreased from 10 to 3. That's huge. Anti-vehicle heavy barrage decreased from 10 to 5. Once again, huge change. Mortar projectile speed increased from 30 to 55, almost double. Munition cost from 225 to 200. So hopefully this really does provide the cover in the designated area, forcing the enemy to get out and punishing him if he doesn't. Pact of Steel command point cost increased from 1 to 2. Secured flanks and force recon abilities. Also active aura range increase from 25 to 35. Oh man, this is a lot, guys. I'm like losing my voice here a little bit. Vermox is receiving gentle adjustments this patch, mainly to address issues regarding early game map control. So artillery officer, Overwatch now has 1.5 second delay before the first barrage is triggered. Does not affect subsequent barrages. So very small change, but I think enough of a change to be able to micro out of the designated area. 1.5 second delay is pretty big. So we'll see. I don't feel like this addresses the major issue of the unit, but it is a nerf. Okay, Whirlwind fuel cost increase from 50 to 60 makes sense. The Crusader A for the Brits is 70 fuel, right? If I'm not mistaken. So this makes a lot of sense, considering you have to purchase the upgrade to unlock this in the tier 2. So it's more in line with balance, I feel. Grenadier squad, Grenadier capture rate increase other infantry or to match other infantry squads, so it can no longer merge into retreating units. Oh, that was a fun feature, but perhaps very strong. Capture speed increased from 1 to 1.25. That's pretty substantial. That's pretty good, guys. It's going to make a difference, but Grenadiers still are probably going to be relatively weak. Kettenkrad has been overperforming for Wehrmacht players, giving them a lot of map control, basically, with the communication cables. So decapture revert rate decreased from 1.5 to 1.25. Communication cables cost from 25 to 40. So you're no longer going to be able to get this right away. Communication cables now increases decapture speed by 0.25 from 0. Okay, so yeah, less map control. Also, the Jeep is not going to be able to hit the battlefield and cap at the same time as the Kettenkrad anymore. So it makes sense the Kettenkrad would also be tuned down a bit. White Phosphorus rounds now has increased effectiveness against targets in cover, gains 25% accuracy units in cover, and lowers the impact of cover damage reduction by 25%. Okay, Neville Wefford 42 rocket launcher. Ooh, they didn't talk about this. This unit's very strong. This adjusts the direct damage caused by the Neville Wefford rocket on defensive structures. So now has 25% damage penalty against bunkers and emplacements. Interesting. I was hoping they would kind of change the damage to vehicles. I feel like that was a little unnecessary given how strong this is against infantry and area of effect damage. But the Neville Weffers are going to be insane still. They're going to be super strong. Panther tank now benefits from the officer training from the Panzer Company. Wow, it's going to be good. This tank is going to be a tank hunter for sure. Panzer Grenadiers, medium range increased from 0.34 to 0.375. I think this is a good change. I think this unit needs some love. I think Jaegers were getting a lot of the spotlight in the last meta. Peagren's a little harder to justify, in my opinion. Stumble half track, vertical tracking speed increased from 18 to 35. Pretty good. Wehrmacht battle groups. So mechanized has some cool changes, guys. I think the mechanized battle group changes are awesome. It's actually my favorite change in terms of battle groups to the game. I think it's a really cool battle group now. It's very thematic. And Senpai Aries in the Sarge HQ Discord, you guys will probably know him from the competitive scene as well. He's been on many different replays from Tightrope and so forth. He was showing me the power of this battle group like a month and a half ago, a long time ago. How powerful it can be, even though it was underpowered in some areas because of Relic's design choices. He was just showing me like how powerful it can be with the right abilities and combinations. Very insightful player. I'm sure many of you guys know him in the Sarge HQ Discord, but very curious to hear his opinion on this now because it's basically accelerated. You're going to be able to get that Westby. I don't even know how to pronounce the unit. Westby quicker, which I love. It's kind of like, it reminds me of the timing of the British Bishop. But for the Wehrmacht, it's like fantastic because of the playstyle of the Wehrmacht and how the faction operates. I really like it. The fact that you can now get these mobile repairing units, as you can see here, mobile repair station replaces the fuel seizure. So 251 half track and its variants, and the 221 scout car can automatically repair nearby vehicles. This is such a cool change. More reasons to have these 251s around. More reasons to opt for 221 scout car attack instead of just skipping and going up to the Wirbelwind. I love this change. Really cool, especially in team games. Being able to have those different build orders and their implications is just epic. Panther, Stug 3 Assault Group, and 8 Rad Commander Point cost decreased by 1. We also saw the Stoßtruppen becoming part of these columns, which is really strong. Raid package command point cost increase from 1 to 2. Zeroing artillery and mechanized assault swap with Stoßtruppen ambush package and West SPG locations to the final row. I think they're great. So you're gonna have your artillery, zero artillery at the end, but the Wesp much earlier. Okay, new ability, unlock Panther heavy tank production. Cost 0 command points to unlock. Alternative pick to the standard Panther heavy tank, and that allows the Panther to be built from the Panzer Company. So once again, call-in buildable costs are the same. At 550 manpower and 100 fuel. So the Panther is cheaper than the Easy 8 in terms of fuel. Obviously more expensive in terms of manpower, 550 versus 440, if I'm not mistaken. But man, I think this Panther is going to be super strong. It's going to benefit from the upgrades. You're going to have the armored battle group or mechanized battle group combinations as well. I think the Panther is going to be super strong in this meta personally. Coastal battle group bulwark command point increase from 2 to 3. Designate defensive line munition cost increase from 60 to 75. Designate defensive line radius decrease from 35 to 30. So designate defensive line was super strong, broken basically. These are minor changes, but substantial changes in the sense that that like it doesn't change the ability of the defensive line, but it reduces its effectiveness, right? So like, you know, having a smaller radius is gonna be good because you're not gonna be able to just zone out a complete area. I do find the defensive line's ability to repair vehicles a little silly, if not silly, a little strong. So I would have liked to see that removed or maybe changed. Like, you know, there's so many ideas, especially with these mobile repair stations. You could even combine and synergize these two different themes and abilities with the defensive line. But just the ability to set up a defensive line and repair vehicles in the line is super strong. So I don't know how I feel about that still. But command bunker cost increase from 250 manpower and 15 fuel to 250 manpower and 25 fuel, which is fine. Yeah, you can't spam these like crazy. 25 fuel is substantial enough to where you just want to build 1 or 2 at most. Ideally, just 1. Guys, so a ton of bug fixes. I'm losing my voice. I need a second cup of coffee for the day. I want to jump into the game client and show you guys some of the features and changes. But go ahead and check out these changes, these bug fixes, art and animation, a bunch of them here. It's actually important to look at and see what's changed. Audio changes, gameplay changes are probably the most important thing. There's a ton of them. Just look at this. Not going to read through all of this, but go ahead and read through these. It's going to really be helpful and important for you. All right, guys, it's going to wrap up a pretty long video covering the live stream, the new update patch notes, some of the new features in game. I hope you enjoyed it. Very interesting update. I would love to hear your guys' feedback on the changes, in particular the battle balance changes to the game. If you did enjoy the video, go ahead and smash the like button, subscribe, leave a comment. It does go a long way supporting the channel. Also, the Sarge GG merch shop is online. Always appreciate your guys' support. Much love for the community, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.